Hello and welcome to our anchor session for CME Palooza Spring. My name is Scott Kober. I am one of the co-producers of CME Palooza, and I want to thank everyone for joining us for this session. I always find these sessions to be really interesting. Not only is this a case-based session, but this is also a case-based session kind of looking at what went wrong. So this is called Celebrating Our Mistakes, a retrospective analysis of what went wrong. And this session is sponsored by Forefront Collaborative. Our moderator for this session is Scott Bradbury. Scott is the Director of E-Learning at the American Academy of Pediatrics, and he will be introducing the rest of our panel here shortly. So before we begin, as with all of our sessions, I certainly would like to thank and recognize all of our sponsors, our gold sponsors, Genentech and Prova Education, our silver sponsors, ASIM, Forefront Collaborative, Global Academy for Medical Education, and Platform Q Health Education, and our bronze sponsors, ACHL, Clinical Care Options, CMEology, Helio Education Lab, Highmark CE, Impact Education, Integritas Communications, Connective, Primary Care Network, PBI, and RMEI, certainly all representing the best of the best in CME. So there are three ways to ask questions during this and all CME Palooza sessions. You can use the Educational Measures text line to send in a question. The number is 267-666-0CME-0263. You can click on the Google slide link found on the live page. Make sure that you're clicking on the Scott sessions and not the Derek sessions. And you can tweet your question using the CME Palooza hashtag. We've gotten lots of really great questions all day. So hopefully we will be able to finish strong with this session. We have a lot of really interesting cases and a lot of things that we can really dig into. So finally, a brief speaker disclosure slide, just that the opinions, discussions, and conclusions expressed by our panelists are their own and do not represent an endorsement by or position of their employer, its parent company, or its affiliates. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Scott to introduce our panelists and to dive into our first case.
Great. Thanks, Scott. It's always an honor to be the last session of the day, or the anchor session, or penultimate session, or what I like to call the start of happy hour session. The road to success is paved with failures, and I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but we built a super highway here for you today with case studies from across the spectrum of medical education and CPD. So when Scott and Derek approached me with the idea for this session, I thought it was really interesting. We celebrate our successes, but in our lives, I think we've all had things that didn't go according to plan, and we can often learn as much or more from those things as from our successes. So I would put together a really great panel, and I'm going to start off by introducing them. And first up will be Ellen Cohen, and she's the Director of CME Accreditation and Maintenance Education at the American College of Cardiology. Klopp, who's the Director of Continuing Education and Professional Development at Reading Health System. And then Olivier Patino, who is the Senior Manager of Distance Education and E-Learning Surgeons. And finally, got Mary Alice, who's the Executive Director at Interstate Postgraduate Medical Association. So they all have interesting stories to tell, and we tried to select examples from a broad spectrum of the CPD world. And accordingly, we'll be touching on all sorts of areas, including collaborations, technology, and content. It's certainly possible and probable that things go wrong in all areas of your CPD world. Out of the way and turn it over to them, starting with Ellen, who's to talk about a few different lessons she has learned over time in her role at CME.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction, and hi everyone out there. Thank you for being with us during this last session of the day. I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation. I am a newbie. I have not participated in this before, so I am very excited to be part of the effort. In thinking about the goal of this particular session, I began to reflect a little bit backwards. I've been in the CME universe for over 21 years now. I've had the experience of working in many different settings, urban hospitals, small specialty societies, a large specialty society, and also as a consultant. So I began to ask myself, I looked back, thought about all the various activities and initiatives I had been involved in over the years, and I couldn't quite pick out one that I really felt I could share with you and sort of point in the absolute direction, here's where we went wrong, here's where, we needed to correct. But I began to think, well, what have I learned from this amalgamation of all these experiences? And I guess I'll start with a quote by Henry Ford. And as some of you may know, Henry very famously said, "Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, and this time more intelligently." So that's a little bit of a guiding star, I think, for all of us when we do encounter roadblocks, pitfalls, and yes, failures or not quite hitting the mark with what we're doing. So my approach and my thinking is set yourself up for success when you're looking at any kind of educational activity or a blended learning initiative, which perhaps has a number of different components that you strive to deliver over a period of time. So before you jump in, and I'm going from the place where I'm assuming you've done your needs assessment, there's been a robust process of gap analysis, determination of your learning objectives, your educational design, your delivery, your outcomes, all that good stuff that I'm sure most of you out there do and do probably pretty well. But begin to think about this. Think about, okay, what are my deliverables? Here are my goals, here are the outcomes I'm looking for. So what do I need to deliver, and what is my time frame? Is it actually achievable? What is my goal if I have a series of live events that I'm intending to place, let's say nationally or regionally? Is my target for participation, is it actually realistic? I know from working in a very large urban hospital and having various programs and having an expectation of X amount of attendees, and perhaps if you have promised this to a grantor, that's a tricky thing. Any program in a hospital setting during the middle of the day, there are challenges getting people to attend. So think realistically about what your goal is and what you've promised. And does it work in the setting where you're proposing to execute it? Think about, have you promised a certain amount of credit claims if this is a grant-funded initiative or program? So the key takeaway really is to think it through, to think about what is your deliverable, is it realistic, is it achievable, and do you have a realistic timeline that you're aiming to fulfill? You really need to think about outcomes. That's where we all are. We need to see the results of what we're doing. We need to be answerable to our learner population, to our funders, to our organizations, etc. So can you really identify realistic outcomes for your program? Be realistic. Are you trying just to advance knowledge? You're trying to improve performance, practice change, demonstrate patient outcomes. So how will you capture it, and can you measure it? Some organizations, larger organizations perhaps, might have a whole team or a number of people who are responsible for developing the outcomes and the tools to measure and demonstrate those outcomes. Do you have that sort of resource? And that really leads me to thinking about, do you have adequate staff to execute what you plan to execute? Are they qualified to do it? Do they have the skill sets? What information, what training might you need to give to that staff to allow them to be able to execute the activity or the initiative in a successful way? Look at your budget. I mean, we all have a fiscal responsibility to our organizations, to our boards, to our funders, perhaps. Is your budget actually realistic? Is it complete? It's important. I mean, you know, you can really just very easily, if you don't think it through, find yourself in a very difficult situation regarding budget. Lastly, I like to think about educational partners. Do you need to partner? Do you need a resource or resources from another organization? How do I identify an organization? And once you feel you've identified them, what process do you go through to see if they are the appropriate partner in this endeavor? You know, what is their philosophy? How do they work? What are their processes? Is this an organization where you can both be on the same page, or is this going to be kind of a push-pull throughout the entire activity or the initiative? Make sure you look at their websites, get recommendations, execute projects. You know, what have they done? What do those projects or initiatives look like? So bearing in mind all these things, perhaps you get to the point where, okay, we're ready to start here. And here's where I get to project management, which I guess maybe comes pretty naturally to me. Before I found myself in the CME world, I was a special ed teacher and then a conference manager. So it was all about managing projects, managing children, managing schedules. And I think the key very often is some very tight and efficient project management skills. I always ask myself, sometimes, are there too many cooks in the kitchen? Are those cooks, are they the right cooks? Do those cooks have the right recipes, the right skills, the right tools? So important to find the correct cooks. I can recall a few initiatives and projects where we've had so many cooks contributing so much input that it became a stumbling box. So I really think it's worth a lot of thought and consideration to identify your correct cooks, train them, and be able to run a very efficient project. So no matter how terrific your project management is on paper, the devil is always on the details, and you need to really get everyone focused on achieving the goal, the outcome of your project, of your activity. You'll need to think very carefully also when I was talking about cooks about, are these the correct stakeholders? Do you have stakeholders outside of this activity that you need to keep informed? Do you need to bring them in to give feedback? You really need to think pretty broadly about the various roles and responsibilities and people who are involved in this project. Plan schedules, milestones, make sure all the actions that you need to take to execute the activity of the initiative are accounted for in your project plan. All these moving parts need to work together. Do you have a plan B? I mean, are you going in one direction and then have some sort of contingency? Well, you know, if A doesn't happen, we're going to go to B. I think that's important always to kind of think about that flip side of things. Do you have a handoff process? Let's say somebody goes out on leave, someone's sick, they have something goes wrong, and you don't have that particular person's resources and attention. You have some sort of handoff so the responsibility can be handed off successfully without any break in the project. Am I talking too long? I'm not keeping track of time, Scott, so just give me a look if you need to. So communication is key, obviously. Change management is key. And risk management, you know, try to see the pitfalls and roadblocks. One tool that some of you may be familiar with and we're currently using, I think pretty successfully, as our sort of project management tool is a RACI chart. R for responsible, A for accountable, C for consult, and I for inform. So when we're looking at a project, we identify our core team and we organize these roles in 7 key areas. Project leadership, needs assessment, content development, faculty management, conference and logistics, including technology, marketing promotion, and budget management. We then look at our key team and any other support staff, and we assign them who is the responsible person, who is the accountable person, who needs to just be informed or consulted. And it's worked quite well with us because it's clear from the very start who is who and what their role is in the project. I would also always advise, if you have these resources, we're a membership organization, so we're lucky that we do, is to appoint a member-based oversight committee. Identify your core chair, obviously, and your co-chair. If they're recognized thought leaders in the field, wonderful, absolutely. You really need them to provide that clinical oversight. I am not clinically trained, I'm trained in education. So we need to have that clinical expertise, that clinical eye guiding us and providing us with content and a roadmap. They'll provide you with oversight on the quality of the content, the validity of the evidence base, and we always want to get their final review and approval of any content that's being put out there. They're also a wonderful resource if you're doing a larger initiative that maybe has some live programming. They can suggest faculty, colleagues, etc., that people who speak well and present well you might contact. So I would also recommend include members of the allied health professions on your oversight committee, particularly if you are certifying for nursing, for pharmacy, what that might be. And also we're all heading in the direction of developing interprofessional education. It's very important to have those various perspectives on the table. So I'll stop now and I'll just end with another quote by Bill Gates, who I personally admire greatly, particularly the work of Bill and Melinda Gates and their foundation. And Bill says it's fine to celebrate success, and goodness knows he has had some success, but more important to heed the lessons of failure. So although I've not presented you with one case, I think I've tried to kind of consolidate all the various things that I've learned and would recommend to anybody who is really looking at learning from their past and moving forward in a successful fashion. So thank you all, and Scott, over to you.
Yeah, that's great, Ellen. Thank you very much. Why don't we go ahead and keep moving and move right on to Erica, who's going to talk about her experience in rolling out a system-wide depression screening process in all of her ambulatory offices.
Thanks, Scott. So Ellen touched on a lot of things at a larger level that I'm going to talk about in my case presentation here. When I was approached to do this, I thought my biggest goal in doing this is achieving behavior change. You know, that's the outcome we're all striving for when we create education. And I worked on a project recently, and I'll tell you the lessons I learned in how not to achieve behavior change are what I'm going to share with you today. There's so many things we could have done better, and hopefully we will do better going forward. And looking back, they are mistakes that can be prevented. So my case study is going to be talking about a rollout of a new depression screening process in all of our ambulatory offices. I have to say, the need for this came out of a community needs assessment that we did as an organization. We partnered with local stakeholders in our county along with the other major hospital in our area, and found that we were really lacking in identifying and treating depression. So I thought, wow, this is great. I've got this robust needs assessment. our ambulatory offices had put together a brand new quality committee. And I thought, wow, this is what they tell us to do. They tell us to partner with quality, right? And work with them and go out and make something happen. And this is how you get change. This is how we get our physicians to change. We work with quality, we put together a process, and it's all going to be great. So I hit this one. Our education rollout was determined to be an e-learning module in our learning management system, because being ambulatory offices, we had a lot of people we needed to reach, and getting them all on campus to do a live presentation wasn't going to touch them. Our initial goal was to get our physicians to utilize a PHQ-2, which is a 2-question form to screen all outpatients that came into their offices that were 18 years or older. And this was done in the primary care offices. If they answered yes to one of the 2 questions, they were expected to follow up with a 9-question questionnaire, and then based on those scorings, follow a treatment algorithm. So I was excited when I sat down with the team and they said, we have an algorithm all laid out for how we think they should treat them. We just need to get some education out to them about why this is important, how they're going to do it, and what's expected of them with follow-up with the patients. And I thought, this sounds easy. We know that in our organization, 70% of antidepressants or depression medications are prescribed by our primary care physicians. So I thought, wow, it seems like they're already doing this. We just aren't utilizing the tools we'd like them to do to catch some misses. So we decided to create a pilot process and trial it in one office, and then continue to roll it out 3 at a time. And our IT people from our electronic medical record system area assured us that we would be able to measure the number of patients with completed forms versus those who qualified to get the forms, so we could get a percentage of completion. And our overall goal, of course, was to increase identifying and diagnosis of depression, so we could reduce our underdiagnosed or untreated population in the community. So what went wrong? A lot of things went wrong. We went live, physicians weren't completing the screening. Those who did complete the screening were not prepared for lengthy conversations with patients. That is something that we were not prepared for. We did not think ahead to, when you're asking patients specific questions related to depression, it gets them to open up, and all of a sudden you get a lot of stories and a lot of extra talking that the physicians weren't prepared to deal with within their 15-minute scheduled visit. And not only from a time constraint, but also from how do I handle the conversation. We didn't prepare them well enough with conversational tools. How do they speak with the patients about some of the issues that were going to come up? Because these are primary care physicians. They're not psychiatrists. They haven't been trained to have more of these counseling sessions that these questions opened up for them. We learned that the algorithm for treatment was too complicated. So even if they did the screening, when they got the results, the treatment algorithm was so complicated they weren't able to effectively implement it in the proper way. Our EMR process was clunky and did not flow well, and it did not automatically generate a patient follow-up or referral. We thought we had tested this properly in advance, but that didn't work well for us when we went live. And because of these barriers, even the physicians who we had successfully got on board and were initially doing the screenings stopped doing them. And to top it all off, that wonderful outcome measurement that we were promised we were going to be able to do didn't happen. We were unable to track the metrics that we had hoped for in our electronic medical records, so we couldn't even provide ongoing feedback to the physicians from the time we went live to address those who were not doing the screenings. We couldn't come back to them and say, this past week, you saw 20 patients who should have been screened and you screened 2 of them. So without that immediate feedback loop, that became a problem as well. So the big question, why do things go wrong when we're trying to do what's right? And my biggest lesson learned from this is, first, we need to seek to understand. We need to know why people are doing the things they're doing. They're practicing the way they're practicing already for a reason. And without understanding the flow of their practice and the way their office works, we're not going to be able to go in and get them to change. So we need to research and understand the physician's practice and their office workflow. That was the first thing that I learned. Every practice has a different process. So as we continued to roll out from site to site, we realized that it wasn't the same process that we were incorporating in each site. Some people preferred to have the nurses who roomed the patient do the first two question form, and then the physician would just follow up if they needed to do the 9 question. Others preferred to have the nurse do both. So we learned that we needed to understand the office workflow and incorporate the education into the context of how that office worked. So we needed to understand the way they worked and incorporate our changes into the context of their normal workflow. Because anytime you're asking them to do something different, that adds time and adds additional consequences, which in this case were patients becoming quite talkative, and also sometimes they were offended. So we didn't prepare them for those responses. You need to be aware of these things and include that in your education. The next lesson we learned throughout our rollouts is we needed to include the whole patient care team in our education rollout. We needed to have the whole team, the whole office staff complete the education together. And we found it worked best if we had them do it in a room in the office with the facilitator there on hand to answer questions. The other lesson we learned was it was more beneficial as we went on if we provided at the elbow support for the day that we went live to help them with any EMR problems they had or follow-ups. And knowing that we were able to give immediate performance feedback following go live. So having a facilitator there on the site who could answer questions, ensure people were doing what they were doing, and provide immediate feedback became something important to us. And the ultimate, testing your reporting metrics in advance if possible, because when you go all the way through a project and you get to the end and you can't get the measurements or reports that you had hoped for in your outcomes, that's probably one of the most disappointing things I've personally ever experienced. And then providing for us in this situation some kind of tip sheet or we had a handout that we laminated that we actually attached to the screens in the rooms in the future offices that we rolled out in to guide them based on the scoring process so they knew what to do next with the treatment algorithm. So, I mean, for me, a lot of things went wrong early on. I was excited to partner with quality. I was excited to partner with a new group. But as Ellen mentioned, I think we had a lot of cooks in the kitchen early on, and I didn't feel like my voice was strong enough in addressing some of these things. But now, looking back and moving forward,
I think Erica froze up.
Erica, you still there?
I think she froze up, but that was the end of her case. So maybe maybe she will come back and give a closing comment. But I would say maybe if you want to move along to Olivier's case, I think that would be great.
Oh. Sure, let's go ahead and do that. And I'll say I had a couple questions for Eric that I can circle back to if she pops back on.
I'm back. I'm sorry. Not sure what happened there, but I had wrapped up. I was going to say go ahead and move on.
So Erica, just in thinking about your case, were there things, in looking back on it, do you think that it was doomed from the start, or do you think that if you could redo it, that there were aspects that you could salvage or redo it in a way that would have made it successful, in light of everything that was working against it?
I think in the beginning, especially with our first pilot rollout, we were kind of doomed from the start with not even being able to access our metrics and our reports the way that we had hoped. But because that is the one thing we did smart, is we rolled it out in a pilot office first, and then we only went 3 at a time from there. we were able to make changes as we went. So we were able to learn as we went and make those improvements. So along the line, we were able to make improvements and get to where we wanted to be. But in the beginning, we were certainly doomed unknowingly.
Up against it. Yeah, yeah. When I know that starting small and being able to pilot something before you roll out to a bigger implementation is a theme that'll come up in a couple of the other presentations as well. So thank you. So let's go ahead and move on to Olivier, who's going to talk about, take us over in the technology world and talk about a learning management system that was donated and what could possibly go wrong.
Well, thank you, everyone, and I want to especially thank the CME Palooza organizers and Scott for inviting us to this panel. When I was approached about this topic, this is the first thing that came to mind because it is still vivid after all these years. And I think oftentimes when we look back at successes and failures, we remember both. And I certainly go into projects remembering both when I approach a project. So I thought of sharing this with you where we had an LMS being donated to us, and my question was, now what? So to give you a little bit of background, we had a committee where a member had the capacity at his institution to use an open source LMS that was customized for their use at their institution. And he approached the committee and said, I'd like to donate this for this committee's purpose with this audience of distributed institutions. And the college did not have an LMS that was able to provide online learning to this community. And so this was a great way, a cost-effective way to maybe adopt this technology for this community. So one of the first things that we wanted to do is get to know this open source technology. That's wasn't one that I was familiar with. It's called A-Tutor. And so I needed to do a little bit of homework on that as to what this open source technology entailed. We looked at the LMS that was packaged to see what types of functionalities it would provide us with. And those were not just delivering course materials, assessment tools, but also had some interactive real-time collaboration tools available to us as well. So that was an interesting functionalities that this LMS offered out of the box. We needed to assess the resources to bring this LMS in-house. One of the benefits of an open source LMS was that we were able to package it and literally zip it and send it our way. We needed to work with our internal IT team to figure out how to bring this zip file to life on our servers. And so we needed to assess some of the resources for that purpose. We then obviously need to support a system. So we needed to figure out who's going to support. Is it going to be out of the Division of Education area or out of IT, or do we need to bring in additional assistance? So we needed to do an assessment there. And then now that we have this technology, what are we going to use it for? And because we had a committee through which this came in, we thought, let's pilot it with the committee, since it has some interactive tools to see how that will resonate, and then move from there. And from there, we developed a pilot 2 and a pilot 3. So what went wrong? I tried to summarize it in themes of 5 with some common theme amongst them. But these are the lacks, or what went wrong along the way through these various pilots. I think at some point you all have encountered these lacks or what went wrong in a project. And I had the benefit to have 5 of them and a little extra. So what I will do is take you through each of them. So the lack of adoption occurred when we found out that What worked well for one institution with a distributed center did not translate well scaling it up to a society with a more diverse distributed center. So this LMS was really designed for an academic institution that had branch campuses. And we as a college, we accredit centers, and we thought that we would have these same distributed locations, institutions, but it didn't scale very well. And that affected the adoption. Pretty quickly out of the gate did we also get user feedback from the committee that there were some user interface issues that affected the adoption. Simple things. I can't remember the link. I can't remember my login password because it's not integrated with other systems the college offers. It seems to have duplicate functionalities depending on where you were in the system, which confused folks. And then we had some language issues too, because some terminologies that were used in Canada are a little different than in the US. And so we had some issues with the labels of command buttons for the functions. So those affected the adoption. In terms of the interest, we thought that, it's a donated system. We provide this value, and this would be great. Everybody thought this was a great idea. And then when we start to ask questions through a needs assessment, the answers came back, well, we already have an LMS. We don't need yet another one, or we don't want to use somebody else's yet again. We have some cobbled systems together to create our own LMSs that work just fine, so thank you, we're not interested. But some of these institutions had nothing, and they said, well, great, let's see if we can pilot it. So again, we did hear this undercurrent, though, that there were user interface issues that affected this interest. Upon first looking at it, people thought, well, it's not that user-friendly. And again, we had this login issue to deal with. So that was another item that went awry a little bit. The lack of purpose was another item that I thought went a bit off base. As I mentioned, this came out of committee, so the first pilot project was for the committee to use it as a collaborative tool. We thought that we could have real-time meetings with video conferencing capabilities. We thought that we would exchange documents and do real-time editing of the documents. And we thought that the committees would make use of that for their committee work. And again, between the login and the usability issues, it just didn't take traction. So the second pilot then was, let's take it to those centers that don't have an LMS, that are interested in this, and let's train them and have them build a course and pilot a course with faculty and a learner audience and collect their feedback and do a needs assessment through that channel. But again, we had these persistent user interface issues that kept creeping up. Next, please. So if you go back one slide, please. Yeah. So after those two projects, the third one was, well, let's see if we offer free content to the audience that maybe it'll get adopted. Even with the free content, people were looking at it and said, well, it's not quite applicable to our institution, or can we edit the content, or no, thank you, we already have modules that are similar to this, so we have no need for it. So you see the pattern here where we started within the committee trying to make use of this technology, then we broadened it to a larger audience, and people felt that there were some user issues, and it just took a long time for them to build courses and then never mind deploy it. And in absence of having to come up with their own content, they said, well, it would be great if we had content already in it. And so the person who donated the system also donated some free modules. And now we have 3 modules, and then we still got this feedback. So that's why I put the ... because it kept going on. Next slides. So after 3 pilot projects, going back to this community, people start saying, you know, how relevant can this really be? What kind of value is it adding when we tried it in 3 different ways? While we continue to have these user interface issues. And meanwhile, from a technology standpoint, we needed to update the server, we needed to do patches, new software came out, needed to upgrade. We tried to change some of the user interface issues with the labels, so we changed the look and feel of the system a little bit. So, you know, while these 3 pilots were ongoing, we had this other work going on to try and tweak it along the way. So, what can we offer from such a project? You know, assess contributions and its value proposition up front. It's great to get something, in this case, donated, and it worked great for where it was at. But deeper diving into what value proposition it brought to the table to what we were trying to do for this community. We should have probably done a little bit more due diligence on that before saying yes to implementing or adopting such a technology. We needed to start out with defining functionality requirements to meet the needs rather than, you know, providing a technology and then trying to fit things in. And I think we've all had that situation to some extent on some projects occur, where you try to retrofit a program into a platform, and the platform limits you to really deploy the program as you had originally intended or that you thought needs to be deployed. Assessing all the resources at a particular point, technically we needed to upgrade certain things, and we had to get some outside help back from the original institution to help us with those, just because it became very technical and we didn't have the in-house capacity to handle those. So we had to, you know, go back and assess those resources that we didn't identify up front. And then these user interface issues kept coming up, and we underestimated the importance of that. And you know, if at the end of the day, if people find it difficult to access or can't quite understand how the functionalities interrelate with each other, then that really puts a kink in deploying a quality educational program by having that kind of a barrier. So, you know, that's kind of in a nutshell the case that I wanted to share with you about, you know, what I thought was a solid approach up front that after 3 years of going through, believe it or not, 3 years, and having these learning lessons from it was eye-opening. And would we do it today differently? Or absolutely. And that's a benefit of learning from our mistakes. So thank you very much.
That's great, Olivier. Thank you. I do have I think the phrase, sometimes you get what you pay for, comes to mind.
That's right.
So I wonder, did you, the user interface issues, was this something that you identified early on as a barrier, like when you were evaluating this at the very beginning, or is it just something that through the pilots persisted as a barrier that kept popping up?
You know, I deal with technology all the time, and I'm so close to it that I just don't see it sometimes. You know, what's intuitive to me is not intuitive to the learner that's in our target audience or to the faculty that we have to work with to develop these courses. So I click and point things all day long in these systems, and there's a little learning curve for me to have that, but I just realize that I've lost that perspective, and I need to really use others to do that for me before I would proceed with a system like this again. So when you're this up close, it's tough to see the differences. Well,
it really shows the value, I think, of their feedback, their perspectives on whatever it is that you're trying to implement, because they're the implementing or using, their feedback is what's going to be the most valuable.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's go ahead and move on. And Mary is going to finish us off with another case study. What's the worst that can happen? I think we're about to find out.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks for those of you who are still with us. I realize in honor to Brian McGowan, who's looking for where happy hour starts, I think I stand between you and the end of the day. So what's the worst that can happen? You imagine this, and the first thing you might come up with is maybe a key project manager walks into your office and says, I'm starting my FLMA tomorrow. Or you find out that your new boss is starting tomorrow and they tell you that that was the person who fired you from your last position. Or your conference chairperson gives you a call and says, I just found out that I can't get out of my jury duty that starts the same day as your annual conference. Those are some bad things that could happen. I think that I'll tell you a few ideas of what my worst thing that could happen. So let's hide the slides for just a sec, if that's okay, Scott. So our story, we were about 3 years into a project. We'd been working with an organization doing some specialty education. We'd done quite a bit of work. It was a global project. We were working with this partner for a specific expertise they had in developing enduring materials. We were looking at new evidence that was entering into the market. We'd worked with, at that point, about 30 faculty from around the globe. We had done weekly status calls. We had worked together and had a lot of trust, I thought, between the two organizations. We were approaching the end of this project, and then the phone rings. And the phone call starts with, hello, Mary. I was given your name. I'm a vendor and I'm working on this project. And I was told to call you because the group that we were working with has closed and gone out of business. And your heart drops and you say, excuse me, did you really mean to call me? Am I the one you wanted to talk to? And they say yes. And they say, we have not been paid for the work that we've done. And we want to know what the next steps are. And we're told that you're in charge. And that to me was about the worst thing that could happen, except it got worse. I went from anger. I went through all of the stages of grief, but I spent 98 minutes on anger and about 2 minutes on developing a plan. And the plan goes like this. And if I could bring up the next slide, Scott. We have figured out who needs to know what just happened. And I should add that there was a moment between the anger and the plan where I got on Google Maps and tried to find the office. I actually called the police they were not in my same town, and asked them to go by the office. I called personal cell phones. I've been to these people's houses. I called their home phone numbers to do anything I could just to gather information, and realized that I was not going to get information. So now's the time to go into crisis management. Who needs to know, and what do they need to know? And what do I know? What deliverables are at risk? Where are the assets that you need? And how much time do I need to get this all figured out? And then the last question was sort of who else has been run over? What I was able to determine, and the first call was to my board chair to say, I have a problem. My second call was to my faculty chair to say, what do you know? And then my third call was to my project team to say, okay, what do we have? Where can we go? What can we do? We were ultimately able to discover that indeed the company had gone bankrupt. They had closed their doors. The employees did not know this was coming. and that they pretty much hadn't been paying their bills for at least 6 weeks, in spite of delivering to us milestone agreements where we had paid them for services to be done. So we felt that we had to put a plan together. The first thing we realized is we had to make a lot of phone calls and say, who are you, what do you know, and when was the last time you were paid? And those are pretty embarrassing phone calls to have to make. We also realized that in this case, it was a commercially supported activity. We needed to call the funder and say, hey, I got a problem. We need to work through it. So through this all, what we discovered is we needed to be incredibly transparent about what we knew, where we were going to go, and we needed to be very honest. And what we found was when we responded with both of those components, that people responded back to us in a very positive way. And indeed, the faculty who had not been paid were really went out of their way to be kind back to us and appreciated that we were trying to do right by them and what they were doing. Our commercial supporter was very understanding. They wanted a plan, they wanted to understand it, they wanted a full reconciliation. But there was a sense of, let's see how we can work through this together in a what's a powerful way. I mentioned we want to know who else was run over. And that became really important to us because indeed there were employees who had worked for this company. There was a printer who hadn't been paid. There were people who were suffering just as much as we were, if not more in some cases. And we were able to put together agreements with them to make the best out of what was a not so good situation. And those people ultimately became our allies in indeed getting the work done to the best of our ability. So what happened as a result of this? We did change our policies. We are much more particular about paying people. These were people that I had a lot of trust in, and it's a recognition, and I felt bad for them. Not that bad, but I felt bad that this had happened. And so we did change a lot of policies about how we partner, who we partner with. I go back to some of Ellen's early comments about what's risk management look like. And I still, in retrospect, don't know that I would have recognized the little signs that were there along the way. Next, trust but verify. We asked for a lot of components along the way. And now every time we enter into something, there's always a plan B. So I come up with my top 10 things I walk away from this experience with. Number 1, lawyers are your friends. So after calling my board chair and putting my plans in place, one of my very early phone calls was to my lawyer, to our corporate lawyer, who reminded me that this kind of thing sort of happens all the time, and wanted to remind me that any legal action or retribution that we might have thought about was going to cost us money, and ask the question, do you want to pour more money on bad money? So that perspective in the larger world was very helpful to us in putting it together. Second is payments are milestone based. You get some money up front, but I want to know what you're going to do and how you're going to do it before there's going to be money that's exchanging hands. This third one was to document corporate entities. And what we ultimately found out was that the printer they were using was owned by somebody else that was a member of the family. So we would not, they never referred to them that way. It was always, we're using XYZ printer. But what I ultimately came to find out was it was sort of some money that was transferring hands without being transparent to us. So now if there is an organization that's going to be used, who are you using? How is it documented? Where do you go? Number 4 for me is shared documentation. We did have some central file servers in this for this project, which helped us tremendously. It meant that we did have a lot of proofs and documentation. So from an ACC compliance perspective, as well as from trying to rebuild things, we were able to do a pretty good job with it. But now I feel that way even more so. In the age of a Dropbox or Box.net or whatever kind of file system, there's no reason that you shouldn't all have access to the same material at the same time. I mentioned trust and verify. Trust, I want to make sure that whoever I work with, we feel sort of, we mesh. But I also want to make sure that I've got external references, that I see other work that they've done, and we understand how that would go together. Honesty really is the best policy, but there's a point where you can be too honest. And by that I say, this is a small industry, and I didn't want to share anything that would hurt or harm some other individual or even that company. So I can tell this story and have told this story several times, but I'm not going to tell you who it was or what exactly the project was. And that would be my don't be too honest. 7, never sign a contract that you can't fulfill in some other way. So again, I go back to some of Ellen's comments at the beginning. For us, it's looking at some arrangement or some agreement and saying, if this were to go south, how else would we get this work done? 8, find others who were harmed because they are often your best friend. You want to take care of them, but they are often your best friend. And they actually, a medical writer ended up being hugely helpful in putting pieces back together. Number 9, communicate frequently, even when the answer is, I don't know. That communication is a really valuable component. And number 10 is sort of release your stress. This happened in, I believe, June, a number of years ago. And I took up swimming every morning because I felt that I had personally let my organization down. And I needed to find some way to sort of de-stress myself with all that. So those are my top 10 list. I'm going to give you an epilogue, which is lightning can strike twice or maybe even 3 times. This has now happened to me twice. And the 3rd time is with a small consulting group who I thought did really well together, only to discover that they really couldn't stand one another and broke apart shortly after we had actually signed a really big contract. So I've learned a lot. I have my top 10. I don't take it personally anymore, but recognize it's hard in many ways to put to work in this field where you need to rely upon people to fulfill the needs that you've got. But business is flighty, and people come and people go. So you better be ready to plan, and you better be ready to put it together. So that's the worst thing that could happen.
Great. And I think back on Ellen's presentation at the very beginning when she talked about the importance of Plan B, a formal Plan B, at least some strategies that you can fall back on in the event that things go wrong, because it's in as much as how you recover from our failures in the moment and then later on that really defines what we learn and how we can move forward. So thank you for that, Mary.
So Mary, we did have one quick question. I know we're up
Sure.
against time. One quick question that came in through the educational measures text line. So what did the police say when you contacted them?
So the police said that there were newspapers piled up outside the door, and there were a whole bunch of FedEx tags, and that they had no forwarding address and no additional information. And unless I wanted to go and through my lawyer do some kind of search warrant or something like that, that they weren't this office space was leased, and so there was no sort of investigative reporting to do. So the answer is really nothing, except to verify for me, because I wasn't on site, that this is what happened. And the other piece I'll make is, did we lose money on this? Yeah, we did. We made good on everything that needed to be done, because we felt that was the commitment that our organization had to make, and appreciate really the flexibility and that people gave us to perhaps take a little longer or do it in a little different way than we had intended. So.
Okay, great. Well, some of you may notice that we've been joined by the poster child of what went wrong, Derek Warnick.
Hey.
So Derek and I both want to remind everyone watching this session to please complete the survey to help us plan for future CME Paloozas.
Yes, please do. We have 46 currently who have done it, and there's been far, far more than that who have watched.
So we're hoping to get up to 12,000 this year. Yeah.
Yes.
So we've got a little bit.
We're a few short.
Yes.
A few short.
So with that, I'd like to thank our panelists for this session, Scott and Olivier, Mary, Erica, and Ellen, and to thank everyone for another great day of CME Palooza. This was our most technologically unchallenged program day that we've had to date. Nobody's computer died. Nope. Everyone was able to get on. We were able to see just about everyone today. So I think from that perspective, definitely a success for us. And
I'd like to
Derek,
point out,
do you have any more comments? Go ahead.
I think Scott has an ironed shirt on, which is pretty amazing.
Actually, it's a wrinkle-free shirt.
A wrinkle-free shirt. Oh.
Same difference.
We were close.
It was probably ironed at some.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. This is, I think, one of our best ones ever. We had everyone got on. We've had lots of participants. We had maybe the most questions that we've ever gotten from the audience. I think people are catching on to how to do it. So it was good. I am thankful for faculty and for everyone who watched.
All right. Well, great. Well, everybody go enjoy happy hour, and we will see you all again in the fall.
Thank you.